Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How y'all doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing my next video in my palette roulette series in which I review a palette that is in my collection that might also be in your collection. I come here, I talk to you about the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things that I found to be true in my experiences with the palettes. I show you some eye looks, we do some swatches, and then we pick a new palette, and I hope that you're here for that. And if you are, please keep on watching because it's coming right at you. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I'm a lover of all things high and colorful beauty and self-care, and ultimately this is my self-care. I'd like to come out here and talk to you about all the makeup that's coming into my collection, out of my collection. I do reviews, project pans, all the regular YouTube-y stuff for the beauty community, and I would really love it if you subscribed and supported my channel. And if you're watching, you probably are not just happenstancing upon this video. You've watched before, so why not subscribe? It's super free to you, and I would love for you to join my YouTube fam. So that said, if going over palette reviews for these two palettes that we'll be talking about today sounds interesting to you, please keep on watching. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Cosmic Brushes / Beauty Muse palette. And Cosmic Brushes was a new to me brand actually this year, I think. Nope, late last year. The very first palette I used from Cosmic Brushes was the Wonderland palette, and I used that through the month of December and really fell in love with their brand that, to be honest, I was afraid to venture into because they have 20-pound eyeshadow palettes for like $30, and I was afraid that they were going to be awful because of their price point, but they're just so pretty. This eye look is 100% from, well, 98% from the Cosmic Brushes palette that I have sitting in front of my face, and I just think it's just so pretty. It's just so pretty. They're so pretty. So that said, we're also going to be looking at the Unearthly Cosmetics Don't Be Jelly palette, which Unearthly was also a new brand to me last year that I 100% fell in love with. Their shimmers are out of this world, and so excited to be talking to you about these palettes. So I think we're going to start with this one, which is the Cosmic Beauty / Brushes Muse palette. This is a $24 palette. It has 0.81 ounces of product in it, or 0.041 ounces per pan. There are 20 shades in this palette, 12 mattes, 8 shimmers, and those 8 shimmers consist of 3 duochromes, 1 iridescent. 12 of the shadows in this palette are considered pressed pigments, which are not safe for eye use. There was a comment that I believe I pinned in one of my last palette roulette videos that I am going to like reference here in the cards for you, that goes through all of the pressed pigment stuff about not being safe for eye use. To be honest, it's just about the fact that our FDA system in the US is so far behind any other country's testing system, and or they just decide not to test because it's too expensive or they're too lazy or whatever the fact may be. So the pressed pigments in this palette and in the Don't Be Jelly palette are okay for any other nation's eyes, but not for the United States of America's eyes. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's absurd. But you do you figure out what you need to do for your eyes. So this is what the component looks like, and it just comes in a sleeve that pulls off and it looks the same as the front of the palette. So it's not going to take up a whole lot of space, but the sleeve does, when you turn it over, it does have a section on it right here that kind of talks about each one of the shades in this palette and which ones are good for eye use and which ones are not. So you can see how they're like dotted in here. And those ones are the ones that are not safe for eye use. I will talk to you about those when I go through the swatches. The front of the palette looks like this. Beautiful like watercolor. It says Muse across the front of it, and then the back of it looks like this, and it's just got some information. It does talk about this is a palette for eye and face. There are some pressed pigments in here that are not safe for eye use in the United States. Tells you a little bit about the weight of the palette, and also the shelf life is 24 months. You open it up. It does have a mirror. It doesn't have, like, honestly, the strongest magnetic closure. So I would say if you're going to travel with it, definitely keep it in its sleeve, because the magnetic closure isn't strong enough to keep it from, like, you know, if something should like bump it, it's gonna open up and your shadows are gonna get damaged. This has got a full-size mirror on it, which I think is great. It does not stand up on its own. It's really like floppy in the binding, but it does fold back on itself, which makes it easy to use. You can stand it on a table like this if you wanted to and use it as a vanity in that way, but then you're going to be going back and forth with your shadows. This is what the palette looks like. You guys can see this is such a beautiful palette. Very like muted in color story, kind of grungy, but also not at the same time. Like, I don't know. I was really inspired by and also motivated to use this palette just because of the crazy beauty of the color story of this palette. It surprisingly is full of variety. And like I said, this eye look today came out of this palette. This is a very neutral, very wearable, very everyday eyeshadow look, and almost all of it came out of this palette today. I have this like green tapped on to most of the lid space on top of a different color that wasn't quite giving me what I wanted for this look, so I popped the green over the top. Other than that, lid shade, every other shade came out of this palette. You can get an overall everyday eye look out of this palette, which I think is wonderful, even though when you look at it, it maybe doesn't 100% look like that because it is very colorful at first glance. The shadows in here are super pigmented and they blend well. They also build well and play well with any other shadow that they're working with. I did not have a problem getting any of these shadows in this palette to work. And I think I said the same about the Winter Wonderland palette. They're just beautiful. They're beautiful mattes, really, really pretty shimmers. I wouldn't say these are like necessarily the best shimmers on the planet, but they are beautiful shimmers. They don't flake or go anywhere. They're just really pretty. This is a really, really affordable, really pretty, really, really great eyeshadow palette. I would say that even though these take a little bit of time to get, because they are a UK-based brand, so it's going to take you a minute to get them in your collection after you pay for them, it still didn't take very long. I think it took like 3 weeks to get to me, which was not bad at all. These are approximately the same price as like what you're going to spend on like a Morphe palette, but so much better a formula. These could fit really well into like prestige formulation. These did have like a teeny tiny bit of fallout, but no fallout really to speak of. There was no creasing or fading. The wear time is approximately 10 hours with this palette before visible like movement in the shimmers or visible like fading of the outskirts, the very lightest color in an eye look. There is a little bit of staining with some of these like darker colors, but there was no irritation that I felt. And I sometimes, because I have really sensitive eyes, do feel the irritation that sometimes comes with pressed pigments. I didn't feel any kind of irritation with these shades in here. I think with the Winter Wonderland palette, I did have 1 or maybe 2 shades for me that I did feel a slight bit of that irritation with, but I didn't with this palette at all. I think that this is best with a primer, a tacky primer for the shimmers, a regular primer for the mattes. I don't think that having a primer on your lid does anything to assist in performance, because these perform very, very well whether you have a primer on your lid or not. But I do think that the tacky primer does help with making sure that your, shimmers stay on your lid space. These still stick to your lid space whether you have a tacky primer on or not, but they tend to move more quickly or like not crease. I don't really think that I ever have had a problem with shimmers creasing on me, except for like maybe the occasional shimmer. So it's not about creasing. It is about movement of the shimmers for sure for that tacky base. For the regular shades, it's about staining. If you wear a primer, you're less likely to get that staining that happens on your lid with some of these like darker colors. I did wear the green without a primer on my lid one day, and my lid was so stained. And then I wore it in a different eye look with a primer, and my lid didn't stain at all. So the shimmers are best with finger application. I don't think that any of them picked up rather well at all with a brush. So I would say if you don't like playing with makeup with your fingers, which is actually a boat that I sit in, this is probably not the palette for you. But if you, or the brand for you, because I do think that even with the Winter Wonderland palette, I did have a better time using my finger to place the shimmers. But honestly, as much as I don't like the feel of makeup on my fingers, it doesn't bother me to dip my fingers into a shadow to make it stand out more on my lid space and be more impactful. That said, sometimes when you are dipping your fingers into shadows, the oils from your fingers cause hard pan on the shadow, and I don't see that happening at all. I only used a brush a couple times in shimmers before I just flat out refused to use a brush anymore on the shimmers and started using my fingers. So I should have hard pan all over, but I absolutely don't. The shimmers are super thin. I think that helps them because some of them are kind of piecey and they are super impactful, but because they're so thin, I think that it helps with how they lay on the eye so they don't exacerbate texture in the eye or create texture where you didn't know that there wasn't any. I appreciate that about them because there are some shimmers from other brands that are really just trying to get that like pieciness or that impact that continue to like put more and more emollients or more and more pieciness into their shimmers, and then those shimmers actually kind of create havoc on your eye. I also feel like that's where I get a lot of irritation from shimmers out of certain brands, is that because they're so piecey or thick, they fall out throughout the day. These ones didn't, absolutely did not. The color story, as I said in the beginning, is kind of overwhelming. When you first look at it, you're like, oh shoot, what am I gonna do with this? This is so busy. What am I gonna do with this? But I really do feel like at first glance, it might be overwhelming, but when you look at it differently and look at it through like a strategic mindset, you will find that it's actually really easy to get even a neutral everyday look out of this palette. But one thing that I think that I would have loved from this palette is I don't necessarily 100% think that all of the shimmers complement all of the mattes. That said, like we have these two purples here, which are beautiful shimmers, but this is the only purple really to speak of that's in the palette that is a matte. And I would have loved to have had a dark matte, or you know, even have this shimmer be a dark matte instead of a dark shimmer. This is a purple, but it's more of an eggplant, so it actually is in my eye look today and it leans more brown. It's a purple, but it leans more brown. I also think that all of the greens in this palette are beautiful greens, but these two green shimmers do not complement those greens. So this one does this. So I can put together a really beautiful eye look with these three shades here, kind of blended out with this one, or even these three shades here. But this one really doesn't go with anything but this. And even then it doesn't go with that because this is a really deep green and this is more of like an evergreen. You guys will see that in the swatches. I just wish that, like I say it all the time, when a palette is overwhelming like this but the shimmers all complemented the mattes. So every shimmer in here went with every single matte in here. I don't feel the same about this palette, but I do feel like you still get beautiful eye looks out of this palette. So I'm really happy to have that palette in my collection. Really, really happy that I chose to purchase from Cosmic Brushes last year because, like I said in the beginning, it was a brand I was scared of because of the price point. And that is so absurd, right? That palette is cruelty-free and vegan. The brand is cruelty-free and vegan. That palette does have 4.97 stars on the Cosmic Brushes website with 97 reviews on it. And I do know that this is also a palette that has a ton of reviews on the YouTube space. So if you just type in Cosmic Brushes Muse palette, like, you will probably find a ton of different videos that are going to walk you through this and maybe pull eye looks together for you at the same time for review purposes. I don't watch any reviews prior to doing my own review, but I do know that there's a ton. I remember there being a ton when this palette first came out. So, all right, so let's look at the shades of this palette. As you guys know, I don't really do live swatches anymore. I'm going to start trying to get the swatches in different lighting, different colors. You guys know that I do a video of them, and I also just take a standalone picture that I can show you while I'm walking through them. But I don't like doing them live with you guys because I feel like the videos take so long, and because I'm doing more than one palette these days in these reviews, I don't want to keep you here for 4 hours because I'm doing swatches on a palette. But let me know what you guys think. I would be willing to change that to anything that suits you. So the first one we have here is Luster. Luster is an iridescent pink magenta metallic. So it's a little bit of a duochrome. The next one is Haze. Haze is the first of the pressed pigments. It is a cool tone medium nude matte. The one right next to it is Rosewood, which is a red tone brand matte. I do think that both of these have a slight bit of red to them, which might mean that they are made with a dye instead of carmine, which is mashed up beetles, to keep this palette cruelty-free and vegan. The next shade is Ambient. This is a duochrome blue to brown metallic, and this one is also a pressed pigment. And then Filigree, which is a deep olive toned green matte, which is also a pressed pigment. So in that first row, you have 4 pressed pigments. The next shadow, next line, is Inspire. Inspire is a lime green metallic. It's a truly beautiful shadow. I love this shadow. It fits right into my happy bubble of those chartreuse colors that actually look chartreuse. The next one is Sweet Pea. This is a warm lilac matte. It is a beautiful blending out shade. This is also a pressed pigment. Then we have Patina, which is a mid-tone green metallic. It has a little bit of a gold fleck to it, which is also why I don't really think it goes with a lot of the other greens in this palette as far as a shimmer for the lid space when you're using the greens in this palette. It is a beautiful green. I loved using the shadow. I just don't think it fits into this palette as well as it looks like it fits into this palette. The next one is Nouveau. This is a cool toned green matte, and this one is actually not my favorite. It's not my favorite shadow. I did get a lot of use out of this shadow using it with the blue in the Don't Be Jelly palette. I have a really beautiful eye look that I did with those 2 shades, but other than that, this is also a shade in this palette I don't think goes here. There's not much in this palette that looks good with that green. I could have done without that green in this palette, but it is a beautiful green, and I also did not have a hard time using it. I just had a hard time using it with the other shades in this palette. Then we have Admire, which is a mustard yellow matte, and I love a good mustard yellow matte. It is in my eye look today. It was in several eye looks I did. It's a beautiful, beautiful mustard yellow matte. Next row, we have Softly, which is a pastel gray green matte. This is also a beautiful blending out shade. It worked beautifully as kind of like a white-ish or esque shade with even like the purples in this palette or the browns in this palette or the purples in the Don't Be Jelly palette also. I found a lot of use for this shade and was actually surprisingly pleased with having this shadow in the palette because at first glance I looked at it and thought this isn't a shadow I'll ever use. This is a pressed pigment shadow. Then we have Pine, which is the dark evergreen matte. The Pine does kind of stain your lids. It's not a pressed pigment, but it does stain my lids. Next we have Muse, which is the name of the palette, the namesake of the palette. It is a duochrome pink to gold metallic, and it is a pressed pigment. Really beautiful shade. I used it quite a lot. Then we have Fig, which is a rich, dark, like purpley maroon, like almost eggplanty matte. Like I said, it is a purpley maroon, but it does come off very, very brown. It is in my eyeshadow look today as a brown, and it is a pressed pigment. This one also stained my eyes. Then we have Amethyst, which is a dark purple metallic. I really, really wish this had been a matte, but I will tell you, as a metallic, it is beautiful. I only wish it had been a matte so that I could have a dark purple matte that actually came across as a purple. This is a truly beautiful metallic though. It has kind of this pink like flippiness to it without being a duochrome. It's just so, so pretty. It is also a pressed pigment. So almost the whole first row and almost the whole third row are pressed pigments. In the next row, we have Antique, which is also a pressed pigment. It is a duochrome blue to green and also kind of pink to purple. I would say this is more of a multi-chrome. Like, I maybe don't know, and I don't explain my shadows very well. I pull these shadow explanations straight from the website if I can. And if I can't, then I kind of try to muddle through it. But I would say this is more multi-chrome status than it is duochrome status. And like I said, it is a pressed pigment. The next one we have is Willow, which is a grungy khaki green matte. Water Lily is a chartreuse matte. Again, a beautiful chartreuse. I really feel like it did fit the bill of a beautiful chartreuse. Then we have Petal, which is also a pressed pigment, and it is a warm, dusty pink matte. And then we have Whisper, which is a pressed pigment, and it is a lavender metallic. Ultimately, I think that these shadows are beautiful. There is nothing besides like a color I wish that would be instead that I have to say poorly about these shadows. Like, there was only 2 shadows that stung my eye, or not stung my eyes, that stained my eyes. None of them stung my eyes. Some of them, 2 of them, are so much more pretty than the description states on the website. Like, when I think of Patina and Amethyst, like, I think those are much prettier shadows. And I mean, even Antique, much prettier shadows than they give it credit for on the website description. There isn't one of the shadows in this palette that I had a hard time with. There isn't one of the shadows in this palette that I didn't like. The only complaint I have, and it's not really a complaint, it's just like, I would have preferred like this instead of that, or this kind of color instead of that color. But ultimately, this is a beautiful palette, and I would recommend it 100,000 times over and over and over again. The price point, it's not even good for the price. It's just good. It's a really great palette. So if it's on your list, if you're questioning it, get it. I think that you can do a great everyday eye look with it, and you can also do a great like colorful eye look with it, or you could do a great like grungy eye look with it. There's so much variety in that palette. I love it so much. I love it so much. Okay, the next palette I utilized throughout the month was the Unearthly Don't Be Jelly palette. This is such a beautiful component. All of Unearthly's palettes come in a beautiful box. This is the beautiful box that this one came in. I kept all the boxes. I think at the end of the day, you could pull all this, you know, foam and stuff out and use these boxes for something. I don't know what I'll ever use for them, but I am a collector of beautiful things, and this is a beautiful box, so I decided to keep it. That said, this is a palette that was on my list to purchase when I finally did purchase from them at the end of, or the middle of last year. I think I finally dug in and purchased from Unearthly for myself for my birthday. So this is the Don't Be Jelly palette. You can see it's got jellyfish all over it. It is a beautiful cardboard package with black background with purple and blue jellyfish on it and blue like metallic writing. It is flat to the package. It's not raised or indented. It says Unearthly on the front. It says eyeshadow and pressed pigment palette because there are pressed pigments in here as well. And on the back of the palette, it just gives you more information about the palette. It still has those beautiful jellyfish on it. Tells you that it is cruelty free and has a 24-month shelf life. Unearthly Cosmetics is based in St. Cloud, Florida. It is just a cardboard package. It does have a pretty decent magnet on it. I would say that if you had it in a bag and something hit up against it, though, it is, if it's pushed just so, it is going to catch that lip and open it. So I would maybe protect it if you're going to be traveling with it. I don't think that it's super fragile, so I think that it would be really nice to travel with this palette because it's beautiful and it would be good for party central. That said, you open up the palette, it's got a good decent sized mirror. It does bend all the way back on itself, but I don't want to break the spine of this palette. This is what the shadows look like. So this is a $60 eyeshadow palette. It does have 12 shades in it. 5 of them are mattes, 4 of them are duochromes, 2 multichromes, and 1 regular shimmer. These are magnetic pans, but unlike my last Unearthly Cosmetics palette that we walked through, they don't have the divots. So even if you have the magnet, like, they're not just going to pull out of there. You're going to have to destroy the palette to get them out. So these aren't going to remove like other Unearthly palettes do. This is the remastered version of this. I think the other one did have the divots on it. And the last palette I went over does have the shadow names on the back of the pans. I'm not going to destroy my palette to figure out if the shadow names are on the back of these pans, but I would have to assume that they're not, because these pans are pretty socked into this palette. But maybe they are, because that's how Unearthly rolls. I don't know. The mattes in this palette are thin, and therefore I think they build really, really well. They're pigmented, don't get me wrong. This blue shows up blue when you first put it on, but the more and more you build it, the more and more blue and vibrant it gets, right? So they're thin, buildable mattes, and I think that makes them user-friendly for just about anybody who wants to try and use these shadows, which I think is good for somebody who's maybe not a color lover to dive into color. This would be a perfect palette for you because it's more buildable color than it is straight up pigment. I do love their mattes for that reason, because you could go really super soft and get a real nice like watercolory feel to them, or you could build them up and be like stark blue in your face. I will say, if you are heavy-handed, they are a lot more pigmented than at first pounce than they would be if you're less heavy-handed. I'm not a super heavy-handed person. I mean, you guys can see I use the ton out of this palette, and you can barely see that there's any usage in it. I'm just not a super heavy-handed person when it comes to my makeup. All of them are fully pigmented, like I said, when they first lay down, but they build very, very well and become more opaque and more vibrant and more electric when they are built. There was no fallout that I noticed with any of these, and I think I said the same thing for the last Unearthly Cosmetics palette that I reviewed, which is really rather shocking to me. They're not super firmly pressed, if I'm honest with you. I don't feel like there's a lot of powder in the pan, but I also don't feel like they're the most firmly pressed. Like when I think of ABH, is a super soft formula, right? And there's a ton of powder in the pan. These absolutely are nothing like those. But when I think of like Melt, has a pretty hard pressed matte. These are nothing like a Melt hard press either. They're not super soft pressed. They're not super powdery in the pan, but they're also not super hard pressed. I wouldn't say they're even medium pressed. They're just not powdery, and they just have no fallout. I do think that they are firm. We're going to go that way. They're firm. They're not hard pressed. They're firm. And these feel super good to the touch. A lot of pressed pigments feel real kind of like scratchy or like sandpaper. I would say the same thing for the Cosmic Brushes palette. They're not super sandpapery. Even the pressed pigments, they feel really super soft and buttery to the touch, which is different. These do stain your eyes. These stain your eyes a lot. but they are also pressed pigments that I did not find any kind of irritation with. And I have really super sensitive eyes. Like I said with the last palette, like they're usually, if there is a pressed pigment in the palette, you can almost bet money that I'm going to come back to you and say that 1 or 2 of them did irritate my eyes. None of these did. I did struggle a little bit with this palette in patchiness. So this shadow here is super patchy. This shadow here was super patchy. And this shadow here was super patchy. So 3 of the 5 mattes in this palette were really patchy on my eyes. I will say I have eyelids, specifically this one, that are super hard not to experience patchiness with because I have eczema on my eyelids. So the patchiness could be simply a me thing, but there are formulas that I have in my collection that aren't patchy. And I think my last Unearthly palette, I didn't deal with patchiness with the mattes. So I really go full circle with this in that it could be the eczema on my eyelids, but I have been, you know, using my eczema honey on my eyelids really a lot, and I don't experience the amount of patchiness that I experienced with those 3 shadows often. So I kind of think some of it had to do with the palette in and of itself. It's not saying it's bad. I battle patchiness because of the eczema on my eyes. It's not really something that makes or breaks how I feel about a palette because of my own eyes. I just thought I'd mention it because, like I said, I didn't experience that with the mattes in the last Unearthly palette that I had, and it was only 3 of the shades in this palette that did it for me. So I really do think it's got to do about those 3 shades more than it has to do about my own eyes. So there's that. The shimmers in here are mostly a bit more on the sheer side. And I think that because they're more on the sheer side, they really speak to anything that I put them with. But in addition to that, every single matte in this palette has a shimmer that goes with that matte, or 2. And they build well on top of each other, and they just create this like seamless art on your eye look. There's so many eye looks that I did with 3 or 4 shimmers out of this palette that just look seamless and beautiful, and like they became like this beautiful multi-chrome that became a bigger, more intense, more impactful, more beautiful multi-chrome on my eye because I was layering them on top of each other because they're mostly sheer. So there's not like a base pigment that you're fighting with those. That said, if you want there to be a base pigment underneath them, you really do have to put a base pigment underneath them. So like I did utilize a lot of these all over the lid and then tapped a shimmer on top of them, which made it hard for me to use a glitter glue if I was going to be using a base pigment underneath the shadow, which was fine because I do feel like tapped on the lid as a topper, these are still impactful and beautiful and work really, really well. I do think that they are more impactful and more beautiful when you're using a tacky base, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with just tapping them out over the lid. They're still so beautiful. The shimmers in this do work best using your finger, are best over a tacky base. They don't pick up well on a brush at all. They don't pick up period on a brush, whereas the Cosmic Brushes one at least picked up a little bit on the brush. These ones don't. That said, when you use your fingers, it does tend to cause hard pan, and that's frustrating because like this one here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it has a little bit of hard pan. This one here has a little bit of hard pan. Even this one here has a little bit of hard pan. It doesn't take much to like get rid of the hard pan, right? You can scrape it off. You can take a piece of tape and pull it off. You can do whatever you want to get it off, but it is a little bit frustrating because they only really work when you're using your fingers, and for them to have hard pan almost immediately, that kind of sucks. Again, not a make or break moment for me. I know how to get the hard pan off, so I'm going to keep using them, and they are stunning. Stunning. The wear time with this palette is approximately 8 hours. I saw without visible fading or movement. I just think that these mattes were a slight bit thinner than the last palette that I had for Unearthly, and therefore I could see a little bit more fading earlier in the time frame of wearing them than I could with the last palette that I wore from Unearthly. They didn't bother my eyes at all. The mattes, as long as they were over, or the shimmers, as long as they were over a tacky base, didn't really move at all. It didn't fall out throughout the day. There was no irritation to the eyes from the pressed pigments to the mattes. Yeah, they're such a beautiful palette. I'm super happy to have it in my collection. Let's talk about the shadows. First shadow here is Salty. Salty is a duochrome pink to green shimmer. Then we have Sea Space, which is the first pressed pigment in this palette. Sea Space is a duochrome blue to purple shimmer, and this one did have a slight bit of a base to it. It's the only one really that had a base to it. It had a blackened blue base to it. The next one is Sea Urchin. Sea Urchin is a deep plum matte, truly a beautiful matte shadow, and this one is a pressed pigment. Then we have Hydraspace. Hydraspace is the first multi-chrome in this palette. It is a pink to blue to purple to silver, truly beautiful shadow. I think that you can see that in the swatch over the top of any color in this palette, including any of the shimmers. It just really made an eye look pop. Sea Star is the next one, which is an electric purple matte. This is also a pressed pigment. And then Brine, which is a light green shimmer, is such a beautiful shimmer. And this one I think is like the one that is the basic shimmer in this palette. The second row and the first shade is Lagoon. Lagoon is a royal blue matte. This is a pressed pigment. Then we have Aquatic. Aquatic is a duochrome aqua to violet shimmer. Truly a beautiful blue shimmer. Then we have Luminescence, which is also a pressed pigment. This is a multi-chrome violet to coral to pink to gold. I would say that that multi-chrome up top worked best with any of those shadows up top, and the multi-chrome down here worked best with any of the shadows down here, but both of them really worked well over the top of anything and really brought out the magnificence of the rest of the shadows in this when tapped over the top of any of the other shadows. It's just so pretty. Then we have Coral, which is a pressed pigment, and that is a coral matte. Jellyfish, which is a duochrome pink to lavender, also a pressed pigment, also super beautiful duochrome. And then we have Seafoam, which is a mint green matte that I used so much more than I thought I was going to use. I loved that shadow to blend out the top of any eye look towards the brow bone, as an inner corner, as a brow bone highlight even. Oh my gosh, it was such just a pretty, pretty mint green. It was so pretty. So as you can see, those are beautiful shadows. All of the shadows that I had to work with this month were so pretty, and I had so much fun. And I hope that you saw that in the eye looks that I was able to get pictures of. There were a couple of eye looks that I wasn't able to get pictures of for you for whatever reason. Like it was just, I forgot, or it was dark, or like whatever the reason was. There were a couple eye looks that I didn't get pictures of, but I did try to recreate them on a later date for you. I think that there's one purple eye look that I didn't recreate at all. That was, I think, one of my favorites, honestly. So that's a shame. But this eye look today is mostly created out of the Muse palette. As I said, there were so many stunning eye looks that I got from utilizing both the palettes together, but also utilizing one or the other. And for those of you who are unaware, like the pictures that roll through here, when I'm talking about the Muse palette, I'm trying to put the pictures that I created mostly from the Muse palette in the Muse palette review section, and the ones that I did with Don't Be Jelly, I'm trying to put in the Don't Be Jelly review section of this video. But ultimately, I had the most fun when I was using both of the palettes in tandem. So Both of these palettes are 100% staying in my collection. I love them so much. I had so much fun with them. And I am so glad that I took the leap and bought something from both of those brands last year because they're beautiful shadows. I would say Unearthly and Cosmic Brushes are very quickly becoming two of my favorite brands to play with just because they're so easy to play with and they're also so beautiful. That said, that is it. That is all I have for you for those palette reviews. So now I am gonna go pull my new palettes and I will be right back. Okay, I know this seems crazy. But I think I'm going to do another month of Unearthly and Cosmic Brushes. So towards the latter end of the year last year, I bought 5 palettes from each one of those brands. So that is largely what makes up my drawer of shame. And I am having such a good time with both of these brands that it doesn't seem horrible to do. The only thing is the redundancy of the output that I give you in terms of how I feel about the mattes and the shimmers. That said, I do think that we experienced some differences with the Don't Be Jelly palette than we did with the, what was the first Unearthly palette that I did? Than we did with that palette. So I do think that there are some idiosyncrasies that you will hear in a palette review utilizing palettes from the same brands time over time. And I really wanted to focus on mostly green for the month of March because it is my favorite color and because it is March, which is the month of St. Patrick's Day and is considered the green month, right? I mean, when you think of March, you think of green because of St. Patrick's Day. So I am going to be bringing in the Cosmic Brushes Undergrowth palette, which I'm so excited to use. Green is my favorite color, and look at all the beauty in this palette. Oh, so pretty. I could come up with this eye look in this palette though. I'm so excited to use this palette. So excited. And then the one from Unearthly that I'm going to be using is Devour, which will give me those pops of color that I am going to need because I am going to get bored with all the greens, but it still has all these beautiful greens in it. And these are different colored greens than what we're seeing in the Undergrowth palette. So I will be partnering these two palettes together. I think that we're going to see a lot of green next month, and that is okay with me. I love green. I'm just going to have to maybe get my hair done green or something that complements green. I don't know. My next hair appointment isn't until the end of March. So there's that. That's it. That's all I have for you. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope that you enjoyed all the things that I had to, or learned something about all the things that I had to say about the Unearthly Don't Be Jelly and the Cosmic Brushes Muse palette. Let me know what you guys think of those two palettes. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section. Let me know what you think about the two palettes that I'll be reviewing for the month of March. I would love to hear your thoughts about those palettes as well. Let me know what you think about anything. I would love to have conversation down in the comment section because you guys are my only friends and I love you so much. Thank you guys so much for watching my video today. I hope that you and yours are well. I hope that you are all safe and healthy and getting along as best that you can. I hope that you are all loving each other, being kind humans, and living your best life. And until next time, bye friends.